I never thought the worst day of my life would also be the day I met the woman who would change everything. But that is how it works sometimes. The universe breaks you open in exactly the right place so that something new can get in. I just didn't expect that something to be 6 feet of cold, expensive, completely unbothered woman standing in a doorway, looking at me like I was a mild inconvenience she hadn't budgeted time for. I didn't expect her at all. But I had no idea what was coming. And if I had known, I'm not sure I would have believed it anyway. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought I had and found the one thing I didn't know I was looking for. Chapter 1: The Day It Broke. I want to say I had no idea. That is the version I told people in the weeks that followed, and it was half true, the way most self-protective stories are half true. I had no concrete evidence, no proof. No moment where I looked at the facts and assembled them into a conclusion I couldn't take back. But there is a kind of knowing that lives below the evidence, a shift in temperature, a new quality of silence. The way someone laughs at something you didn't hear and then recovers a half second too late. I had been not knowing for about 6 weeks. Jamie and I had been together for 2 years. 2 years that I had understood as solid, as real, as the kind of thing you build a future on. We had the same friends, the same Friday nights, the same easy shorthand that develops between people who have spent enough time together that they stop performing and start just existing in the same space. And Kara had been my best friend for longer than that, since college. Since the year I moved to the city knowing no one, and she had appeared at my door with a bottle of wine and absolutely no agenda except that she lived next door and thought we should know each other. Kara, who knew every difficult thing about me and had never once used it against me. Kara, who I had trusted the way you trust the ground, without thinking about it, because it had always been there. I found out on a Thursday. I came home early, migraine forming at the base of my skull, the kind that needed dark and quiet and my own bed before it became something I couldn't manage. I had a key to Jamie's apartment. I had used it 100 times. There was nothing remarkable about the decision to go there instead of my own place. We were in and out of each other's spaces the way people are when they have stopped thinking of them as separate. I opened the door. I stood in the hallway for what felt like a very long time. Then I closed the door behind me, quietly. Because even then, in that first cracked open moment, I did not want to make a scene. I did not want to be the kind of person who made a scene. I walked to the end of the block and sat down on a bench and looked at nothing in particular. My hands were completely steady. That was what surprised me most, the steadiness. Like my body already knew this and had been braced for it, and was now simply waiting for the rest of me to catch up. I sat on that bench for 40 minutes. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I thought about the 6 weeks of not knowing, and about how I would have preferred the not knowing to last a great deal longer, and about how that was a completely irrational thing to prefer, and about how I was apparently a completely irrational person. Then I called Daniela. Daniela was the person I called when I needed someone who would not treat the situation as an opportunity to have feelings about it. She would absorb the information, tell me what to do next, and not require me to take care of her in the process. This is a rare quality in a person, and I had always been grateful for it. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I need somewhere to be tonight that isn't my apartment." She said, "Come here." I didn't give her details over the phone. Daniela didn't ask. That was the thing about her. She made space first and asked questions later, and only the questions that were actually useful. What I didn't know, walking to her building with my steady hands and my forming migraine and the enormous empty space that had opened in my chest, was that Daniela had a cousin staying with her. What I didn't know was that this detail would matter more than anything else that had happened that evening. I had no idea. I was about to find out. Chapter 2. The Woman in the Doorway. Daniela opened the door with one look at my face and said nothing. She just stepped back and let me in. That was Daniela. Other people, when they see something is wrong, rush to fill it with words. Daniela understood that some things needed to breathe before they could be named. She poured me wine. She sat across from me. She waited. I told her everything. In a very flat voice that I recognized as the voice I used when I was keeping myself at a precise distance from what I was feeling. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, quietly and with great certainty, "She was never good enough for you. Neither of them were. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it's true, and you'll believe it eventually." She refilled my glass. "Stay here tonight. You shouldn't be alone." I started to argue. She looked at me. I stopped arguing. I was on my second glass of wine and beginning to feel the particular hollow calm that comes after a long period of tension finally releases, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. And then she was in the doorway. I registered her in pieces, the way you register things when you are not at your best. Tall, dark hair, the kind of dark that doesn't have another color in it, cut clean and simple, and worn like it required no consideration. Dark eyes that moved around the room with a quality of attention that was not unfriendly, but was not warm either. More like a sensor. More like a calculation. She wore black, something simple and expensive in the way that expensive things look when they don't need to announce themselves. She was holding a glass of water and looking at me with the specific expression of someone who has walked into a situation they were not expecting and is now deciding what to do about it. She looked like the kind of person that inconveniences simply rearrange themselves around. "Nora," Daniela said, with a particular tone I would later identify as the tone she used when she was being carefully neutral. "This is my friend Ava. Ava, this is my cousin Nora. She's staying with me for a few weeks." Nora looked at me. "You look terrible," she said. "Nora," Daniela said, "it's not an insult. It's an observation." She looked at me with those dark assessment eyes. "Bad night?" "Yes," I said. She took a sip of her water. "Those happen." She said this with the tone of someone who found bad nights to be a well-documented phenomenon with known solutions, not anything to be especially disturbed by. It was the most bracing thing anyone had said to me all evening, and I didn't know what to do with it. She did not sit down. She said a few words to Daniela about something I didn't follow, and then said to me, not unkindly, "There's ibuprofen in the bathroom cabinet if you need it," and walked back down the hallway. I looked at Daniela. "Her bedside manner needs work," I said. Daniela smiled in a way that meant she agreed, and also meant something else I couldn't quite read. "She's not good with people she doesn't know, or people in general." A pause. "But she meant it helpfully." "I believe that," I said, and I did. I took the ibuprofen. I slept in Daniela's spare room. I lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the building breathe around me and feeling the shape of the new reality I was in. 2 years. my best friend. Both of them. The ground I had thought was solid had turned out to be something else entirely. And the last thing I thought before I finally fell asleep was not about Jamie or Kara at all. It was about dark eyes that moved through a room like a calculation, and a voice that said bad nights happen like they were a law of physics, like they were manageable, like they were simply a condition to be noted and moved through, like they ended. I found that strangely comforting. I had no idea, lying in that spare room in the dark, how much more I would think about her before any of this was done. Chapter 3: The Unexpected Habit. I did not plan to become a fixture in Daniela's apartment. It happened by accumulation. The first week after I found out I was barely functional, cycling through the stages of something that wasn't quite grief because no one had died, but felt adjacent to it. The shock, and then the anger, and then the particular flat exhaustion that follows anger when it has nowhere useful to go. Daniela checked in daily. She brought food twice. On the fourth day, she said simply, "Come over tonight." And I did, and it was easier than being alone. Nora was usually there, not always present in the room. More often I would arrive and she would be working at Daniela's kitchen table, laptop open, papers spread in the specific, organized chaos of someone who thinks better with materials visible. She worked in finance, something at a level I understood to be significant without fully understanding the specifics. Numbers, acquisitions, the kind of work that existed in a register above ordinary money and had its own language. She did not make conversation. This, unexpectedly, was exactly what I needed. Everyone else in my life, well-meaning, genuinely caring, wanted to talk about it. They wanted to process, to analyze, to help me understand what went wrong and what it meant and what I should do next. They wanted me to have feelings, and then to share those feelings, and then to collectively arrive at some conclusion that would make everyone feel the situation had been properly handled. Nora had no interest in any of that. She was simply there, working. Occasionally acknowledging my presence with a nod or a brief word, making coffee at the same time I did in the mornings if I had stayed the night. Once, silently, sliding a cup toward me on the counter without looking up from her phone. It was the most peaceful I had felt in weeks. On the 8th day, she looked up from her laptop while I was sitting on Daniela's couch reading nothing, staring at words without processing them, and said, "What do you actually do?" "Sorry?" "Work. What do you do?" "I'm a graphic designer, freelance mostly, some in-house for a marketing agency." She absorbed this. "You're good at it?" I thought about it, honestly. "Yes, actually, yes." "Then do that," she said. "When the other thing is happening in your head, do the thing you're good at. It doesn't fix anything, but it gives you something to stand on." Then she looked back at her laptop. I stared at her for a moment. Then I opened my design software for the first time in 10 days and started working. She was right. It didn't fix anything, but it gave me something to stand on. I started noticing things about her the way you notice things when you are around someone long enough. The way she took her coffee, black, no ceremony. The way she read, very still, with the quality of absorption that meant the rest of the room had ceased to exist for her. The way she sometimes paused in the middle of typing and looked at the middle distance with an expression that was very focused and very private, working something out in her head that had nothing to do with the room she was in. She did not smile easily, but when she did, small and brief, and usually at something Daniela said, it rearranged her whole face into something that was almost startling. I was noticing. I told myself I was simply noticing because she was an interesting person, and I was a person who noticed things, and that was all it was. This was completely reasonable. I was also in no position to be anything other than a person who noticed things, because I was 6 weeks out from finding my girlfriend and my best friend in the same bed, and I was barely keeping myself upright. I told myself all of this very firmly. Then she looked up and caught me looking and said, neutrally, "What?" "Nothing," I said. "You were staring." "Sorry, I was thinking." "About what?" I said the first true thing that came into my head, which I would later reflect was a mistake in judgment, but at the time simply fell out of me. "About how you seem like someone who never lets anything touch you." Silence. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something in it shifted, very slightly, the way a landscape shifts when light changes. "Everything touches me," she said. "I'm just selective about what I show." She looked back at her laptop. I looked at the middle distance and thought about that for a very long time. Chapter 4. What Grows in Difficult Soil. It was 4 weeks after I found out that Jamie called. Not a text, a call, which meant she was either very sorry or had convinced herself she deserved a conversation. With Jamie, those two things had always been difficult to separate. I let it ring. Then I called her back 20 minutes later because I had never been good at leaving things unfinished. She said everything I expected. She was sorry. It was complicated. It had started before she even understood what was happening, and by the time she understood, it was already too late. She still cared about me. She hoped we could find a way to... To what? I said. Silence. "I don't think there's a way to," I said. Not angry, not even particularly sad in that moment, just factual. "I think this is finished. I think it was probably finished before Thursday. I just needed Thursday to see it." She started crying. I listened until she stopped. Then I said goodbye and put the phone down and sat with the silence for a while. Nora appeared in the kitchen doorway. She'd been working again. She looked at me the way she always did, taking in information, calculating something. "Done?" she said. "Yes." "Good." She put the kettle on, made tea without asking if I wanted any, set a cup in front of me on the counter and went back to her work. I held the cup with both hands and felt something that I could only describe as the very beginning of being okay. Not okay, just the beginning of the direction of it. That evening, Daniela had plans she couldn't cancel and left us alone together for the first time. I expected silence. I expected Nora at her laptop and me at the other end of the room and the comfortable absence of social pressure that had become familiar. Instead, she closed her laptop. She said, "Tell me something you're good at that has nothing to do with work." I was surprised enough that I answered honestly. "Cooking. I'm genuinely good at it. I find it calming." "Then cook something." "Here?" She gestured at Daniela's kitchen with the specific patience of someone who has made an obvious point and is waiting for it to land. I cooked. She sat at the counter and watched and asked questions. Not about Jamie, not about any of it, just about the food. About why that particular combination, about what I was doing with the heat. She asked like she was genuinely interested, and I had the sense, which I was beginning to develop around her, that she didn't ask things she wasn't genuinely interested in, that every word she spent was intentional. We ate at the counter. She said, "You're right. You're good at this. High praise from you, I said. You've said approximately 4 complimentary things to me in a month. 3, she said. I counted. I laughed. Actual laughter, the kind that arrives without permission, and she looked at me across the counter with something in her expression that I could not yet fully name, but that I filed away carefully, the way you file something you know you will need later. Can I ask you something? I said. She waited. Why are you being kind to me? You didn't have to be. I showed up wrecked in Daniela's apartment and you didn't owe me anything. She was quiet for a moment. You reminded me of someone, she said. Who? She picked up her fork. Me. 4 years ago. And she said nothing more about it, but it was the most she had ever given me of herself, and I held it the same way I held her earlier answer, the way you hold something small and precisely made that you know has weight beyond its size. I was in significant trouble. I was starting to understand that. I had no idea yet how deep it went. Chapter 5. The Turn. It happened at a rooftop. Daniela had a birthday. Small dinner, close friends, the rooftop of a bar 3 blocks from her building. I was there. Nora was there. 7 other people who sorted themselves into the easy clusters of people who know each other well. Nora and I ended up at the railing, not by design, by the kind of gravitational drift that happens when 2 people have spent enough time in each other's orbit that proximity becomes the default. The city was doing its thing below us, that moving lights and sound thing that cities do at night that is either beautiful or overwhelming depending on where you are emotionally, and I was somewhere in between. You look better, Nora said. Then what? Then when you arrived at Daniela's that first night. I looked at her. She was looking at the city. Her profile in that light was very precise, very still, like something that had been decided rather than grown. I feel better, I said. Mostly. Mostly is honest. You always value the honest answer over the comfortable one. Always. A pause. Comfortable answers are efficient, but they stop conversations. Do you want to keep the conversation going? She looked at me then, and I had been around her long enough to read the variations in her expression, to know that this one was the version where she was deciding something, where the calculation was running and she was waiting for the result. Yes, she said, and the simplicity of it landed in my chest like something important. We talked for 2 hours at that railing. The party moved and shifted around us, and neither of us moved. She told me about the year she mentioned, the 4 years ago year, obliquely but honestly, a professional failure that had also been a personal one, a period where she had lost enough to understand what she actually valued, and how coming out of it, she had rebuilt herself on a different foundation, a narrower one, more deliberately chosen. I told her about Kara, not just the betrayal, but what preceded it, the slow erosion of something I'd told myself was solid, the way I had spent the last year of that friendship sensing something was wrong and deciding not to examine it because the not examining was easier. We do that, she said. Choose the easier version, then feel blindsided when reality asserts itself. Is that a judgment? No, it's just what people do, including me. We were very close to each other at the railing. At some point, this had happened without either of us engineering it, the natural compression of 2 people in conversation who have dropped their guard. Close enough that when she turned to look at me, I could see the specific shade of her eyes in the bar light, not fully dark, with a warmth underneath that she very rarely let surface. Ava, she said. I realized I was holding my breath. I need to tell you something. Okay, I said. I am not good at this. She made a brief gesture that seemed to indicate the space between people, the invisible architecture of connection. At being easy. I have been told on several occasions by people who had reason to know that I am difficult and demanding and not worth the effort required. Who told you that? People who ultimately proved to be right that we weren't suited. Her voice was very even. I'm not telling you this to be self-deprecating. I'm telling you because you have had enough dishonesty recently, and I would rather be too honest than add to it. My heart was doing something very unreasonable. Why are you telling me this now? I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Because I would like to take you to dinner, she said. Not here, not with everyone else, just dinner. And I wanted you to know what you'd be agreeing to first. The city moved below us. I thought about 2 years that had turned out to be something other than solid. About a best friend who had turned out to be something other than safe. About all the versions of choosing comfort over honesty. I know what I'd be agreeing to, I said. You've been telling me who you are for 6 weeks. I've been listening. Something in her face shifted. That rearrangement, the one that was almost startling. Yes, I said. Dinner. She nodded once, like a decision had been ratified. And then she looked back at the city. But she was standing half an inch closer than before. And I thought, standing at that railing with the city below, and the conversation of people who loved Daniela moving around us, that this was what it felt like when the ground changed back, when it became solid again. Different solid. Better solid. What happened next I could not have predicted, but for the first time in weeks, I was ready for whatever it was. Chapter 6. The difficult part. The dinner happened on a Wednesday. A restaurant she chose, quiet and excellent, and the kind of place that suggested a particular understanding of what a good evening looked like. We were there for 3 hours. We talked through 2 courses and dessert and coffee and into the street outside where neither of us wanted to end it, walking slowly in the direction of nothing because stopping meant the evening was over. She was different at dinner. Not different like a different person. Different like a door had been moved 3 degrees. She asked about my work specifically, wanted to see things I'd designed on my phone, studied them with the same focused attention she gave everything. She told me about her father, briefly, the version of a family history that has been considered and edited into the parts that are safe to share. She laughed twice. Actual laughter, not the small, controlled one, something freer than that. I was falling in love with her. I was aware of this the way you are aware of a tide coming in. Not a decision, not a moment, just a steady, inevitable movement in one direction. We saw each other twice more that week. Once for lunch, once for a walk in the evening that ended with her hands in mine on a bench in a park. The most physical contact we had made, quiet and careful and exactly right. And then Kara called. I had not spoken to Kara since that Thursday. I had not been ready. I was not sure I was ready now. But she called 3 times in one day, and on the 4th, I answered because ignoring things had already cost me 6 weeks of not knowing, and I was trying to break that particular habit. She was crying before she said anything useful. Eventually, the useful things emerged. She was sorry. She knew that wasn't enough. She had been in love with Jamie for 2 years, almost the entire time Jamie and I were together, and she had hated herself for it and tried to stop it and eventually failed. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She just needed me to know that she hadn't stopped being my friend in her heart, even when she was betraying me in her actions. I listened to all of it. I said, "What you felt isn't the problem. I understand falling for someone you shouldn't. What you did with it is different." "I know," she said. "You could have told me. At any point. That would have been the harder thing and the right thing, and you didn't do it." "I know." "I'm not ready to talk about whether we can come back from this," I said. "I don't know if we can. I need more time." "Okay," she said. "But Kara," I paused. "I hope you understand what you actually had in me. I hope that's not something you figure out too late." I ended the call. Nora was at Daniela's when I arrived that evening, which had become the place I went when things needed to settle. She looked up from her work and looked at my face and said nothing for a moment. "Kara?" she said. I hadn't told her the name. I had told her the shape of the story. She had assembled the name from context, which was absolutely on brand. "Yes," I said. "How do you feel?" I sat down. I thought about it honestly, which she had trained me without intending to do. "Clear," I said. "Sad, but clear." She nodded, went back to her work. 2 minutes later, she said, without looking up, "You handled it well." "You weren't there." "I can tell by how you're sitting." She glanced at me briefly. "You're at rest. You were carrying something, and now you've put it down." I stared at her. "How do you do that?" I said. "Do what?" "See things." She looked at me. The warmth under the dark, more visible than it used to be, more available. "I pay attention," she said. "You're worth paying attention to." She looked back at her screen, and I sat with that sentence and everything it contained and understood that I was not just falling anymore. I had already fallen. And the difficult part about that was that I had no idea if she had too. But that was the part I was about to find out. Chapter 7. The Lowest Point. She pulled back. I didn't see it coming, which was its own education, because I thought I had learned to read her by then. But there is a difference between learning someone's patterns and knowing their depths. And I had learned the patterns without reaching the depths, and the depths were where the fear lived. It started small. A canceled dinner, work reason, genuine, I believed it. Then a lunch that was shorter than usual, a phone in her hand more than before, something preoccupied in her attention that I couldn't locate the source of. Then a week of very little. I told myself it was the acquisition she'd mentioned, something demanding, consuming the bandwidth she would otherwise spend on this new and undefined thing between us. I told myself reasonable things. I was good at telling myself reasonable things. Then Daniela told me, gently, with the specific gentleness of someone delivering information they wish they didn't have, that Nora's ex had been in contact. Helena. I did not know the name, but I knew the shape of her from what Nora had told me, obliquely, across several evenings. The relationship that had preceded the 4 years ago year, the one that had contributed to what she described as the period when she learned what she actually valued by losing most of it. Someone who had left when things became difficult, and then had a habit, apparently, of returning when things became less difficult. "What does she want?" I asked Daniela. "What she always wants," Daniela said. "She surfaces when she hears Nora is doing well. She has very good timing in the worst direction." I went home to my own apartment that night, my actual apartment, which I had mostly been avoiding because it still felt like the scene of something, the place where I had been a version of myself I was trying to move away from. I sat in my kitchen and tried to think clearly. Nora owed me nothing, declared. We had not named what was between us. Dinner and walks and evenings and the kind of conversation that rearranges people, yes, but nothing formal, nothing stated. She had told me she was difficult. She had told me people had decided she wasn't worth the effort. I was starting to understand that the person who had decided that most consistently was herself. I opened my design software. I worked for 4 hours. I made something genuinely good, which I registered as a fact without particular emotion, the standing on something solid sensation she had taught me to find. At midnight, my phone lit up. Her number. A text. 4 words. "Can I come over?" I looked at it for a moment. Then I typed, "Yes." She arrived 20 minutes later looking like someone who had been having a very internal day for several days in a row. Still precise, still herself, but tired in a way she rarely let surface. I did not ask questions. I made tea. I set a cup in front of her. I sat across the table and waited. She looked at the tea for a while. Then she said, "Helena reached out." "I know," I said. She looked up. "Daniela." She wasn't gossiping. She was warning me. "Warning you of what?" "That you might do this," I said. "Pull back, go quiet, give yourself room to talk yourself out of something good because something old showed up and reminded you of how bad things can get." Silence. "Is that what I'm doing?" she said. "I don't know. You tell me." The quiet in my kitchen was the kind that has texture. She held the teacup with both hands, something I recognized from my own first week, the holding on to warmth because you need something warm. "I don't know how to trust that it goes well," she said. "I know how to survive things going wrong. I have become, actually, quite good at that." Her voice was very careful. "I don't have the same skill set for things going right." "You think this is going right?" She looked at me. "Don't you?" I held her gaze. "Yes," I said. "I think this is the most right thing I have been near in a very long time." She set the cup down. "Helena is," she started. "You don't have to explain her to me." "I want to." A breath. "She is someone I loved who showed me that being loved by me had an expiration date for most people. That I ask too much or give it in ways that don't read correctly or..." She paused. "I have been carrying her conclusion about me for 4 years." "Her conclusion was wrong," I said. "You don't know that." "I know you better than she did, apparently." I leaned forward. "You gave me the ibuprofen the first night. You made me tea when I called Jamie back. You told me to stand on what I was good at. You watched me cook pasta and asked questions like it mattered to you what I was doing with the heat." I held her gaze. "You see people. You are not someone who doesn't see people." Her eyes were very dark. "Nora," I said, "what is it that you actually want?" The longest silence. "You," she said, quietly, with absolute precision. I exhaled. Then stop letting a 4-year-old conclusion make the decision, I said. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she did something I had not seen her do before. She reached across the table and took my hand. Not a gesture, not calculated, just her hand finding mine like it needed to be there. "I'm sorry I went quiet," she said. "I know. I'll get this wrong sometimes." "So will I said. "That's not the question." She turned my hand over in hers, looking at it like it was something she was deciding to keep. "I know," she said. "I know that." And the thing that had been pulled taut between us for weeks released, gently, into something quieter and truer and more durable than tension. We sat at my kitchen table until very late, and that night she did not go home. And in the morning she made coffee, black, no ceremony, and slid a cup across my counter without asking how I took it, because she already knew. And I thought, holding that cup, that some things are grown in the most difficult soil and turn out to be the strongest things in the garden. I was beginning to believe I was one of them, and that she was too. Chapter 8. The Real Thing. I need to tell you about the morning after, not the dramatic version, the real version, which is usually more meaningful anyway. She was up before me, which was typical Nora, because her relationship with sleep was complicated, and she woke early and filled the early hours with the kind of quiet, productive activity that would make most people feel inadequate. I found her at my kitchen table with her laptop and a coffee that she had made in my kitchen without once having to look for anything, because she had been paying attention to where things were. She looked up when she heard me, and what crossed her face, quick and warm and completely unguarded, was something I would carry with me for a very long time. It was the face of someone who had not expected to be happy and found themselves there anyway, and had not yet had time to be careful about showing it. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I said. She had already made me coffee. There was nothing else to say that mattered as much as those two small facts. We did not make declarations over breakfast. We ate and worked, and she showed me something on her screen that she found interesting. Not finance. Something about an architectural theory she'd read about. And I showed her a project I was working on, and she said 3 very specific things about the color choices that were more useful than the 2 hours of feedback I'd gotten from my client. She had an eye. I had not expected that. She had a great many things I had not expected. In the afternoon, I called Daniela. Daniela picked up and said immediately, "She stayed over." "How do you—" "I'm her cousin, and I know her. She texted me this morning, sounding like a person who slept somewhere they wanted to be. Ava." A pause, filled with something warm and satisfied. "I'm glad." "Did you know?" I asked. "When I showed up that first night, did you know what you were doing?" Silence, slightly too long. "I knew Nora needed to be around someone who didn't already have an idea of who she was," Daniela said carefully. "And I knew you needed to be around someone who would be honest with you. The rest I could not have predicted." "But you hoped." "I never hope," Daniela said. "I make conditions favorable and let things develop." I laughed. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me. Just don't waste it." I had no intention of wasting it. What followed was not a perfect linear progression. Real things do not move that way. There were weeks that were easy and weeks that required more, and she was right that she sometimes gave things in ways that did not read correctly, and I learned to ask rather than interpret, and she learned to say rather than imply. We were, in the specific language of two people who are both independent and stubborn and also unexpectedly necessary to each other, figuring it out. She met my friend Priya 6 weeks in. Priya, who was suspicious of everyone on principle and had been particularly suspicious of anyone I might care about given recent events, lasted approximately 40 minutes before she sent me a text from across the table that said only, "Okay, I understand." I put my phone away and looked at Nora across the table, and she raised her eyebrow at me, and I shook my head, and she looked faintly amused. I understood then what Priya understood. Some people, when you see them from the outside, are simply legible. You understand why someone would love them, not because they are easy or uncomplicated, but because the thing they are is the kind of thing worth being around. Nora was that. Underneath all the cold and the precision and the architecture of control, she was someone who paid attention, who meant what she said, who had been hurt enough to build walls and was, stone by stone, taking them down for me. That is not a small thing. That is not a thing you find everywhere. I knew that now in a way I had not known before any of this happened. Chapter 9. What We Built. 6 months after the night I sat on a bench with steady hands and the enormous empty feeling in my chest, I was somewhere else entirely. Daniela threw a dinner. Her apartment, the place where all of this had started, the kitchen where Nora had first told me to do the thing I was good at, the counter where she had set tea down without being asked. 8 people, good food, the easy warmth of an evening that has no agenda. Nora and I arrived together. Daniela opened the door and looked at us with the expression of someone whose patient investment had paid exactly the dividend they expected. "Finally," she said. "Also, you're late." 3 minutes, Nora said. "I timed it." "Of course you did." They looked at each other with the specific affection of cousins, who are also genuinely similar in ways that are easier to see from the outside. And then Daniela looked at me and said, "Good?" And I said, "Good." And she nodded and stepped back to let us in. The evening was everything that evenings should be. Stories that overlapped, laughter that arrived without being manufactured, food that was better than it needed to be. At some point, I looked across the table and found Nora mid-conversation with someone I didn't know well, and she was using her hands to illustrate something, which she only did when she was fully engaged. And she said something that made the whole table laugh, and in the moment after the laughter, she found my eyes across the table, the way she always did, like a check-in, like a reference point, like I was her north. Priya had told me she was mine. Turns out it went both ways. I thought about Jamie and Kara less often now, not because I had stopped having feelings about it, but because the feelings had finished being the loudest thing in the room. They had become something historical, something that had happened and mattered and changed me and was now behind me. And what was in front of me was so much more interesting than what was behind. The ground had changed. It was solid again. Different solid. Better solid. Earned solid. After the dinner, walking home, her hand in mine, the city doing its nighttime thing around us, she said, "You're happy." "Yes," I said. "You look different than you did 6 months ago." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "So do I," she said. "I looked at a photo today, From a year ago. A brief pause. I looked like someone who had decided not to expect anything. I looked at her. And now? I said. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the street ahead, the way she always did when she was deciding how much to give. Now, she said, I expect things. She looked at me. From you? From myself? From what this is? That terrifies you, I said. Yes. She said it simply. And I'm doing it anyway. I held her hand tighter. Me too, I said. She leaned into me slightly as we walked. Just slightly. Just enough. And the city moved around us, and the night was warm, and I thought about all the different versions of how I could have spent this evening. The version where I stayed in my apartment and didn't answer Daniela's call. The version where I walked into that apartment and didn't look up and registered Nora as nothing more than background. All the smaller choices that had built to this one. I was grateful for all of them, even the terrible ones, especially the terrible ones. Chapter 10. Epilogue. 1 year later. I still have the design I made the night Kara called. It's framed in my office now, which Nora pointed out was either confident or self-indulgent, and then said she thought it was confident, which from her is high praise. It's nothing remarkable to look at, just a color study, something I made because I needed something to stand on. But I kept it because it marked the exact moment I started coming back to myself. Nora understands why I kept it. She understands most things about me now. Not by accident, not by proximity, but because she has made it her specific business to pay attention. That is who she is. She pays attention. She notices. She files things carefully and references them with a precision that sometimes makes me feel more known than I have ever felt in my life. I know things about her, too, that no one else does, that the controlled exterior costs her something, and that she is learning, slowly and deliberately, to not pay that cost with me. That she reads at 2 in the morning when she can't sleep and considers it productive rather than insomnia. That she has an opinion about every piece of design she sees and is usually right. That when she is worried about something, she goes very still in a way that most people would miss, but that I now recognize immediately. That when I am having a bad week, she makes things, doesn't ask if I want anything, just makes things. Tea, food, a quiet environment, space that is shaped like care. I told her once that she expressed love in logistics. She considered this for a moment and said, "Yes, is that all right?" Like she needed to check. Like she had been told before that how she did it wasn't the right way. I said, "It's my favorite way." She went back to what she was doing, but she was smiling. We went back to the rooftop bar, the one where Daniela's birthday had been. The one where we stood at the railing for 2 hours while the city moved below us. Not for any occasion, just because she said one evening simply, "I want to go back there," and I understood why without asking. We stood at the same railing. She had my hand. "First time I saw you," she said, looking at the city. "You were the most visibly wrecked person I had been near in a long time." "You told me I looked terrible." "You did. Also," a pause. "Also, I thought, that person is going to be fine. You couldn't have known it then, but I could see it, the steadiness." I looked at her. "I was terrified," I said. "I know. You were terrified and steady at the same time." She looked at me. That's who you are. I saw it in the first 10 minutes. I thought about that. About being seen clearly in the first 10 minutes by a woman I would spend a year coming to understand. About how she had known before I did. About how the thing I thought was the worst day of my life had put me in exactly the right doorway at exactly the right time to be in the orbit of exactly the right person. I'm glad Daniela called me, I said. So am I. She looked back at the city. I'm glad you showed up. I almost didn't. I know. A very brief smile. I would have found you anyway. I laughed. That is either very romantic or slightly alarming, I said. Both, she said. I'm comfortable with both. I leaned my head against her shoulder. She put her arm around me, and the city moved below us the same way it had a year ago, all light and sound and motion, and none of it had changed, and all of it was different. That is what I know now that I did not know a year ago. That losing the wrong things is not always a loss. That the ground can change and be better for the changing. That some people appear in doorways with water glasses and flat voices and 4 compliments in 6 weeks and turn out to be the most honest and the most valuable and the most worth it thing you have ever been lucky enough to be near. Jamie and Kara figured themselves out eventually. I didn't need to know the details. I hoped they were happy. I meant that. Because I was. Genuinely. Deeply. In the specific way that comes from something built on honesty rather than comfort. From choosing the harder, true thing over the easier, false one. From standing on what you are good at until the rest of it catches up. I was happy, and so was she. And that, at the end of it, was everything. That was absolutely everything.